Hello guys, welcome to DrNightStare. I know you guys come here to relax and take a nap. So before we go, please hit like and subscribe. By the way, also tell me what time and where you guys listening from. Alright then. The medical professional had a term for it, auditory processing lag. He explained that the advanced cochlear implant, an experimental model featuring a neural link processor, might require time to synchronize with Leo's developing mind. He might perceive a sudden noise, the doctor said, snapping his fingers, and only react to it a few seconds later. It's akin to a faulty wireless connection. It will resolve. But it didn't resolve. In fact, it became unsettlingly precise. One Tuesday afternoon, my son, Leo, and I were seated at the dining table. He was absorbed in coloring a dinosaur illustration when, abruptly, he paused. He gazed upwards, head slightly cocked, and produced a sound. Thump. Scrape. Leo possessed an uncanny gift for perfect pitch mimicry, a savant talent the specialists had noted. Even before the implant, when completely deaf, he could sense vibrations and hum an exact note. With the new device, his imitation was flawlessly detailed. I watched him, inquiring, "What was that, sweetheart?" He simply pointed towards the ceiling. Precisely 2 minutes later, I'd instinctively checked the kitchen clock, waiting for the oven timer. I heard it. Thump. Scrape. It was our upstairs neighbor, Ms. Albright, moving a piece of furniture across her apartment floor. A chill ran down my spine. The lag wasn't Leo reacting late, he was reacting early. He was apparently receiving audio information before it materialized in our shared reality. We began to test it, and it became a bizarre, private spectacle. Leo would replicate the low hum of the refrigerator's compressor, and 2 minutes later, the appliance would kick on. He'd mimic my phone's text message, chime, and 2 minutes later, the screen would indeed illuminate. Initially, it was fascinating. Then it grew tiresome. But tonight, it escalated into pure terror. We were in the living area. The time was 9:40 p.m., and the apartment was eerily silent. I was engrossed in a book while Leo played with his building blocks on the rug. Leo suddenly froze. The red block slipped from his grasp. His small shoulders hunched, almost touching his ears. He opened his mouth and emitted a sound unlike any I had ever heard from him. It was a sharp, shattering crack, succeeded by a wet, heavy thud, reminiscent of a ripe melon impacting concrete. Then, an abrupt silence. Then, he began to scream. But it wasn't his scream. From his small throat emerged a deep, guttural roar. It was my voice. My voice screaming in a pitch so high and terrified it felt like a physical abrasion just to hear it. No. Please, God, no. A different sound followed, a rhythmic, wet squelch. Chunk. 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 I sat there, the book shaking violently in my hands. Leo? He didn't acknowledge me, his gaze fixed on the apartment's front door. He then mimicked the rising wail of a siren, distant at first, then growing louder and more insistent. My eyes darted to the digital clock on the cable box. 9:41 p.m. I had less than 1 minute. I shot to my feet, my heart pounding against my ribs like a frantic, trapped bird. I didn't understand the crack or the wet thud. But I recognized my scream. I seized Leo by the arm. "We're leaving. Now." He was an unmoving, dead weight. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and vacant, and then he mimicked one final sound. It was the distinct click-clack of a shotgun slide. I instantly recognized it. It was the sound of my own shotgun, the one I kept secured in a locked case in the storage unit downstairs, a case only I knew the combination to. Then I heard the whirring hum of the storage unit's motorized door opener. Not from Leo, from the unit itself. I glanced at the clock again. 9:42 p.m. The handle of the door leading to the building's internal corridor began to turn. Leo covered his ears and squeezed his eyes shut. He didn't want to hear it again. Click-clack. Julian always knew he grew up without a mother, or so he was told. The narrative spun for him was simple. She died in childbirth. There were no photographs, no framed portraits, no cherished mementos. No relatives ever offered a fleeting anecdote or a whispered memory. It was as if she had been systematically erased, a phantom limb on their family tree. His father, Robert, a man of sharp angles and even sharper intellect, never spoke of her, and Julian quickly learned the unspoken rule not to inquire. Instead, Julian inherited stories of his ancestry, tales etched in ambition and ruthless efficiency. His grandfather, Elias, a veteran who returned from overseas with a newfound appreciation for Eastern discipline, launched the nation's first chain of elite fitness resorts. He envisioned them not as simple gyms, but as temples of self-mastery, replacing traditional meditation cushions with gleaming chrome and serene courtyards with bold digital displays. Then came Robert, Julian's father, a genius of logistics and foresight. He pioneered the concept of global tech distribution hubs, an audacious venture when the notion of bulk ordering microchips and server racks was met with skepticism. Robert foresaw the future and bent it to his will, reaping vast profits. This was the family's true inheritance, not warmth, not emotional intimacy, but a cold, hard ledger of achievements, a relentless pursuit of expansion carved deep into the fabric of the American dream. On Julian's 30th birthday, Robert insisted on cooking him dinner. This alone was startling. Robert was a connoisseur of Michelin-starred takeout and meticulously catered events, not a man who donned an apron. Yet that evening, Julian watched him in the sleek, minimalist kitchen of his penthouse, sleeves rolled, moving with the precise, absorbed focus of a surgeon preparing for a delicate operation. Julian had just closed a monumental deal for his own company, a revolutionary network of autonomous delivery drones, sleek metallic wonders designed for ruthless scalability. He was genuinely happy, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years, and for once he yearned to celebrate it with his father. When they finally sat at the polished obsidian dining table, the air thick with the scent of roasted duck and fragrant herbs, Robert poured Julian a glass of deep red wine. "To us," Robert declared, his smile a shallow crack that never quite reached the calculating depths of his eyes. The wine tasted peculiar. Not spoiled, but thin, with a faint, almost imperceptible metallic edge, like the lingering memory of blood after an unexpected cut. Julian dismissed it as an expensive vintage he simply didn't understand. They ate. The duck was impossibly tender, melting on the tongue, almost too easy to carve. Robert watched Julian with an unnerving intensity, not like a father sharing a meal, but like a meticulous auditor scrutinizing a final balance sheet. Julian remembered thinking, "This is it. This is finally where we find some semblance of peace." Ass. As the rich meal settled warm and heavy in his stomach, Julian felt his father's hand brush his on the table. He noticed the way Robert's gaze lingered, assessing, weighing. The words that followed were soft, imbued with a strange, reverent gravity. "You have done exceptionally well," Robert murmured. "Far better than I could have imagined." Julian tried to smile, but a sudden tightness constricted his throat. "You are me," Robert continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You always have been. Every success proves it." The elegant room began to tilt. A burning sensation flared in Julian's chest. The edges of the table shimmered and blurred, as if he were sinking beneath a sheet of dark glass. He looked up at his father, but saw not Robert's familiar face, but a chilling reflection, a distorting mirror behind the lines of age and weariness. "You believe you are the son," Robert whispered, his features sharpening, coalescing into something terrifyingly familiar as Julian's vision dimmed. "But you are not. You never were. You are the vessel." And in that shattering instant, Julian understood. Every generation, his great-grandfather Silas, his grandfather Elias, his father Robert, and now Julian. There had never been a mother, never a wife. Only a single, continuous consciousness, an invaluable asset transferred forward, a merciless continuity plan etched in flesh and blood. Julian gasped, waking in a body heavy with age, his lungs tight, his hands, spotted and trembling, lying on the silken tablecloth. Across the table, in the chair he had just vacated, sat a younger man, his own vibrant face, his own posture, his unblemished future, staring back with an expression of dawning, gut-wrenching horror. The younger man, Julian's former self, now housing Robert's consciousness, stood up. He wiped a drop of wine from his lips with a cool, detached gesture. Julian watched the familiar calm settle into his own face, the undeniable relief of balance restored. Then he walked away. And Julian sat there, trapped in a dying frame, tasting the last meal of a man he would never stop becoming. All at once, a vision. No, a memory. Not his own, but vivid, fading. He saw Elias at a table with his own father, Silas, plates between them. A quiet, momentous meal. Elias was talking about the fitness resorts he had opened, the discipline he had brought back from the war, the future he was meticulously building. Across from him, Silas listened, smiled, waited. The same dinner, the same ritual. A different decade. Immortality is not a gift. It is a prison, and the warden never leaves. Alara woke late that morning, her head still heavy from the lingering tendrils of sleep. The house was utterly silent, not merely quiet, but empty. Usually, by this hour, she would hear her mother humming in the kitchen, her younger brother Lucas dragging his blanket across the hall, her father clearing his throat in the shower, and the faint, grating sound of morning talk radio seeping through the walls. Today, there was nothing. No familiar sounds, no movement, just the low hum of the furnace and the soft scrape of her own slippers against the wooden floorboards. She drifted into the kitchen, a simple breakfast her only immediate craving. Cereal, perhaps. But the almond milk was gone, naturally. Only the carton of regular dairy milk sat there, an unwelcome reminder of everyone else's preferences. She stared at it for a long moment before giving in. Peanut butter toast it would be. She spread the creamy butter thick, pressing her teeth into the warm, sticky bread, trying to drown out the morning's irritation with the soft crunch. Remote in hand, she flopped onto the living room couch. Her favorite shows, her recorded movies, all vanished, every single one. She flipped through the guide, half expecting a technical glitch, but the listings were there, just devoid of her saved content. Lucas, she thought, that little monster, must have deleted them again, finding some twisted amusement in her frustration. A sudden urge to escape the house prompted her to find her car keys. But the key hook by the door was empty. She checked her usual spots, her backpack, the kitchen counter, her bedroom floor. Nothing. Walking out to the garage, she found it bare. Her car wasn't there, nor was her father's sedan. Her first thought was a half smile. Perhaps his car had broken down, and he'd taken hers, knowing she'd likely skip her morning lecture anyway. A classic dad move. No matter, she decided. A walk to the local cafe would do. The crisp autumn air bit at her cheeks immediately, carrying the faint scent of damp leaves that swirled around the street corners. She inhaled deeply, hoping it would clear her mind. But the quiet, the profound quiet, felt wrong. Every falling leaf, every snapping twig, every crack in the pavement seemed amplified, as if the world had been stripped of its usual background noise. Even the distant hum of morning traffic was absent. She could distinctly hear the faint flapping of a bird's wings from across town. It felt as though the entire world was holding its breath. As she walked, Alara noticed a series of small, disquieting oddities. Streetlights that should have been off glowed dimly, despite the sun having been up for hours. Neighbors' curtains remained drawn tight, faint shadows moving behind them, yet no one emerged. She passed houses she knew well, their front doors unlocked but completely empty. Mail sat in neat, untouched piles. A few parked cars looked abandoned, their engines cold. Her stomach churned, but she tried to rationalize it as just a sleepy town slowly coming to life. Then she saw it. A crowd gathered ahead on Market Square. People milled about, talking softly, holding balloons and streamers. Must be some kind of local event she'd forgotten about, she mused, a wave of relief washing over her. A welcome return to normalcy. As she drew closer, however, the air shifted. Her stomach sank and her throat tightened. Above the gathering, a massive banner fluttered in the breeze. It read, "Honoring our town's courageous spirit." Ilara froze. The crowd parted as she approached, and she noticed a vehicle parked prominently in the middle of the square. It was her car. Her hands began to tremble as she stepped nearer. And then she saw it, pinned to the windshield like a shrine, a poster with her own face on it. Her name, too. Little children she recognized from school were crying and pointing in her direction. They were uttering words she couldn't quite process. "You saved us," they whispered. "Thank you." She blinked, her heart hammering so violently it threatened to burst from her chest. She couldn't recall doing anything. Saving anyone? She hadn't been anywhere heroic last week. She'd barely left her room. Everything around her began to feel heavier. The air, the silence, the crushing weight of all those eyes fixed upon her. The town, her town, was looking at her with an unfamiliar reverence, and Ilara had no idea why. She took a step back, and the crowd parted a little more, as if expecting her to do something. Ilara no longer knew what was real. He should have never started. That's what Arthur always told himself after that first drag from one of those beautiful white and brown cancer tubes. It had been 10 years since he began, a day he still vividly remembered. Peer pressure was a relentless tormentor. Arthur knew how it went. The desperate urge to fit in, to say yes to things that were unequivocally wrong. If one friend descended, they all tumbled after. Arthur now maintained a full-blown relationship with his addiction, and that was the most insidious kind. The kind that whispered he wasn't truly himself without it. He wasn't Arthur without his cigarettes. He stressed over those bastards more than he did his car keys when they weren't in his pockets, a habit that served as a constant turnoff to Ilara, his wife, who didn't smoke. What was even more of a turnoff was the struggle to climb the stairs to their bedroom, his lungs too busy exacting their revenge, betraying him just as he had betrayed them. Stepping outside every hour for a fix was also a turnoff. What wasn't a turnoff, however, was the palpable sensation of it killing him. His heart thumping harder than usual, his head feeling like it was on the verge of bursting open, yet still unable to stop. That wasn't a turnoff. That was horrific, for both of them. Ilara had begged him to quit smoking since they first began dating. She detested it, and Arthur hated that she hated it, a conflict of loves. This past year, though, she had truly hammered it down. His coughing had escalated to a violent peak last year, and it broke Arthur's heart to see Ilara's tears every time she heard the gravely sound of his failed breathing from the bathroom. He'd emerge, and she'd be standing there, waiting, arms crossed. "We've talked about this," she would remind him. He knew they had. Countless times. She knew he knew. But she also understood that if she kept reminding him, it would eventually etch itself into his cerebellum, priming him for guilt-based success. It took months, but with countless refreshers, Arthur finally made progress. He finally reached the 2-month mark, the longest he'd gone since his 20s without a puff. Ilara celebrated this milestone with a cake. She literally baked him a cake from scratch, not from a box. Her bubbly personality never wavered, not even after all these years. She placed the cake in front of him, proclaiming, "You did ID, honey. I'm so proud of you," and kissed him on the cheek. Now he had to keep going. This was like a formal contract in the shape of dessert. He was going strong. The cravings never fully subsided, but he learned to live with them without giving in. That was his upward spiral. That is, until that day. It had been an exceptionally long day at the office. Arthur was frustrated to the point of not being able to think clearly. He could delve into the entire spiel of how it got to that point, but he'd spare the exposition. He bought cigarettes. That's all anyone needed to know. It was his first pack in 3 months, and the shame he felt was almost enough to make him throw it away after purchasing. Almost enough. Instead, he rushed to his car in the supermarket parking lot like some kind of junkie looking for his next high. He jumped into the driver's seat, and with shaking hands, he tore the plastic packaging from the sleek cardboard box. The smell, oh God, the smell. It was enough to make him drool. It had been so long, the scent had become a forgotten friend. but its return, it was enough to make him forget all progress instead. He popped one of the bastards between his lips and had it lit before he'd even left the parking lot. He smoked one, then two, then three. He ended up smoking 5 of the things on the 25-minute car ride home to their cottage in Willow Creek. He arrived in his driveway, paranoid and sick from nicotine. He couldn't let Alara know. She'd lose it. He'd lose her. Her disappointment would rise to levels previously unheard of in their marriage. He did what he had to do, which was simply throw the cigarettes away. He tossed the rest of what he had left in the outdoor garbage bin next to the shed and walked inside like nothing had happened. Inside, he found Alara sitting on their sofa, fully entranced by some cable TV drama that she insisted on watching, even in the days of streaming. "Welcome home, my strong worker man," she greeted. "How was work today?" Work was, work was work. Sitting beside her on the couch, her smile seemed to drop instantaneously as she snapped her head towards him. "Arthur," she said plainly yet sternly, "what is that I smell?" He felt his heart drop. "Smell? What smell?" he asked nervously. "You know the smell, you liar. All you do is you lie and you lie and you lie." Arthur found himself too ashamed to look at his wife, instead opting to stare blankly at the fireplace mantel while she spoke. "Honey, I'm sore," she cut him off. "Shut up. Stop talking. You are not sorry. If you were, you'd stop talking. You are not sorry. If you wers, you'd stoled. Actually, you know what? You err. Sorry, Arthur, sweet husband of mine. You are a sorry, sorry little man." That one was new, but then again, it had been 3 months. He was so close. "A sorry little man who can't stop fucking up," she screeched. Arthur snapped his head towards Alara. Her face was now blood red, and he could have sworn he saw steam rising from her scalp. "Honey, I know you're angry, but please, I think you should calm D. Don't you tell me to be calm, you incompetent little worm. You are nothing. You are less than nothing. You are a failure, and that is all you will ever be." This voice no longer belonged to his wife. She sounded demonic, unhinged in a way that Arthur never thought possible. "You are a failure, and you know what, Arthur." Her face was now boiling and blistering. Red-hot flames seemed to flicker behind her eyes and escape the wounds in her face. "You're gonna burn. You're gonna burn. You're gonna burn just like the rest of the failures." Her hair was now fully engulfed in flames, and her face was melting off in disgusting drips. Arthur jumped off the couch and ran for the cottage door, but Alara stopped him before he could exit. She stood in front of him, her words distorted and twisted as she tried to speak with a tongue that had melted. Her face was turning this dark, ashy color, like she had literally been burned to ash, and he was only able to make out one final phrase as she crumbled before him. "Do you love me now?" That's all that was left in her before she fell to the floor, a pile of smoking ash. Arthur's head began to spin, and his vision started swimming as he failed to comprehend what was happening. He stumbled up the stairs to their bedroom, ready to curl into a ball and cry, but before he could do that, he woke up. He was in bed, Alara beside him, sleeping peacefully. It was his 3-month mark, and the relief that washed over him when he realized it was a dream was incomprehensible. He started laughing to himself, causing Alara to wake up and roll over to him. Seeing her face was normal made him laugh even harder, and he pulled her tightly to his chest. "Someone's a happy camper," Alara chirped sleepily. If only she knew the night he had just had. Many might judge my sanity, or worse, my character. But honestly, I think I truly am losing my mind. My name is Anya, and I live in this country's sprawling, overcrowded metropolis. The older generations frequently lament that Gen Z is too entitled, incapable of enduring hardship, unwilling to persevere through difficult times. Yet I ask you seriously, who could possibly tolerate this nation's work culture? Your boss dumps a mountain of tasks on you just before closing, with absolutely no overtime compensation. When the work is finally done, your boss claims all the credit. It's utterly ludicrous. I'm getting sidetracked. I'm currently pursuing my master's degree while working part-time. I used to hold a full-time position, But the toxic environment at that workplace became unbearable, so I resigned. Now, with the new year fast approaching, my friends have made plans to attend a countdown party together, a typical young adult tradition. Hey, want to come to my lake house for the countdown? Liam, my ridiculously wealthy friend. The same guy who once notoriously bribed a professor for a top grade. Me, what do the others think? Chloe. Sounds amazing. By the way, does your area have any good connections? I'm looking for 2 small doses, low 456656765. Chloe, battling a severe drug addiction. Small doses is her slang, and those numbers are just how we type laughter here. Liam, yeah. Liam. But listen carefully. If anyone tries to sell you something that looks like scarlet berries, do not buy them. If you somehow acquire them, do not consume them. Tell me immediately. He sounded clearly on edge, his voice laced with a palpable nervousness. Elk, saving them all for yourself? Lol 555678. Relax. I'm not in the market for berries. I was half joking, half sarcastic. I glanced at the time and set my phone down. It was already past midnight. I headed to bed, desperate for some rest after today's exhausting schedule of classes and work. I live in an apartment building with an underground parking garage. Many assume I'm well off, but the truth is, despite its pleasant appearance, this apartment is surprisingly affordable. Perhaps it's because it lacks complimentary breakfast or a swimming pool. Later that night, I was soaking in the bathtub, my mind drifting between school assignments and my job. I work part-time at a local coffee shop, the kind with a quirky logo involving a smiling owl. I was fortunate that my employer granted me New Year's Day off. She's a middle-aged woman, perhaps 50, who appears stern on the outside, but is incredibly kind. For instance, she often lets employees like me take home leftover pastries after closing. That night, I had a profoundly unsettling dream. I found myself in some kind of narrow, winding tunnel, not quite a railway tunnel, but claustrophobically tight. Something was relentlessly chasing me. I ran and ran until the path ahead was completely blocked. At the dead end, I saw crates piled high with strange, glowing red berries. Am I losing my mind or something? CSC, SSESC, CSESC. December 31st. I arrived in the secluded lake region at 6 p.m. In truth, I should have reached Liam's lake house by 4 p.m. I was 2 hours late. What could I do? The city traffic is just magnificent. So, I left my apartment at 11:30 a.m. and finally arrived at the lake region at 6:30 p.m. And then I got lost. The GPS kept trying to direct me into the lake itself, so I just switched it off. Stupid piece of junk, GPS. I drove into a forgotten hamlet. The village was made up of identical cottages. Every house looked exactly the same. Some only differed in their exterior paint color. Otherwise, they were completely indistinguishable. It made me wonder if they all shared the same house key too. I spotted an old woman selling savory pastries from a food cart. Now, some of you might wonder, savory pastries, but why isn't the old woman selling from a proper shop? Well, back in the day, this area experienced severe landslides, forcing vendors to sell from mobile carts. They'd navigate through neighborhoods offering their goods. And you might ask, what was the regional government doing at the time? Embezzling funds, naturally. Back to the story. The old woman was ladling soup for a child. I pulled over hoping to grab some pastries. But I didn't have a plate. I'm such an idiot. So I asked the old woman if I could eat there and if she could wait. She agreed. I also asked her for directions. Ma'am, do you happen to know the way to this place? I showed her the map where I'd marked Liam's lake house location. Right now, you're here. The old woman pointed to a spot on the very edge of my map. Crap. You need to drive straight ahead and turn right. Keep going until you see the ancient stone altar. Take a left there and continue. and you'll enter the affluent properties. I turned to where the old woman was pointing, trying to commit the route to memory. Thank you so much, ma'am. I paid my respects and took the steaming pastry she handed me. The old woman's pastries were delicious. I ordered the meaty variety with a rich gravy. She made the filling incredibly flavorful and gave generous portions. I seasoned it a bit and tasted the hot soup. It was wonderfully smooth, with just the right balance of spice and tang. I tried a bite of the pastry. It was very soft and didn't fall apart. This is how pastries should be. When I finished eating, I left money for the pastries. I got into my car and prepared to drive along the route the old woman had described. I noticed it was starting to get dark. I'd better hurry. Wait, young lady. The old woman shouted, as if she'd forgotten something important. If you're truly taking that route, you need to follow this paper. The old woman handed me a crumpled piece of paper. Thank you? I took the paper and drove off. The old woman was staring at me from behind. I saw two emotions reflected in her eyes, dread and concern. The road soon became desolate, with thick forest beginning to cover the area. The paved surface turned to gravel, a telltale sign of typical budget mismanagement by politicians in this country. Damn corrupt politicians. Forest flanked both sides of the road. There were wide fields stretching out on either side. The atmosphere was incredibly peaceful. No traffic jams, no incessant noise like in the capital city. I was about to turn on some music, but an instinctual nudge told me to read the paper first. The paper was extremely ancient. It was covered in numerous dark yellow stains and looked as if it had been folded and refolded 100 times. And this was the message inside. All side G-E-E. Gurgi-E. Gurgi-U. 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 Easy. Yurgi. Gurgdi. Gurgdi Urgdi. Gurgdi Wargdi. Gurgdi War. Gurgdi War. Gurge turn back under any circumstances. Gurge. Gurgdi. If you observe trees with branches that resemble gnarled hands, disregard them. Focus solely on the path ahead. Should you perceive faint, rhythmic whispers, do not attempt to decipher their meaning. To do so invites madness sex tox. If Eurohujan sex tox 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 Dox darks 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 darks. Scarlet berries is darks darks. P8. S darks tarch darks dark fox. You don't want your tongue severed, do you? S dark yea. If you sense an immense weight pursuing you from behind, you must drive with extreme haste. Otherwise, the forest giants will crush your vehicle flat C 9. Sujanizes off 9. Okamanizes ZZZ 1 mine. Perversa ZZZZZs. AK here is completely eligible. Azizis. Bernard's 12. DA cares 12. The Akamanizizizs. Bernizis. The AKZZZZZZZs. Pers these and Kaminizi. O's and I go like I was that I go Benny Ion no William. And don't worry, I meticulously followed every single guideline I could decipher. Before anyone gets confused, what's a forest giant? In the old folk tales of this region, they are ancient, vengeful spirits. People who showed disrespect to the sacred land or caused harm to nature. When they pass, their spirits become as tall as the ancient pines, with hands as wide as rock faces and a mouth as small as a pebble, forever suffering an insatiable hunger. In the morning, they are scorched by the relentless sun. If such an afterlife exists, this is definitely the last thing I would ever want to become. As I drove, my spine crawling with unease, I heard a sound from behind. It was a deep, guttural thumping, like colossal feet pursuing my car. Huddle. Hud. 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 Hull. 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 Crap. Hull. 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 Oh, crap. Oh, hull. I floored it. I didn't even dare glance in the rearview mirror. And then, a tree started to fall directly towards me. No. I swerved the wheel violently, dodging it by a terrifyingly narrow margin. The thumping sound behind me grew louder, transforming into the distinct rhythm of something massive running, gaining on me. The road ahead seemed to stretch endlessly. Suddenly, a gigantic tree directly in my path began to topple, threatening to block my entire way. So I drove as fast as humanly possible, trying to clear the distance before it fell. Just a little more. The tree was almost down. Please, Dake. The tree crashed onto the road, completely blocking the path. But my car, pushed to its absolute limit, was just fast enough to clear the distance, so I survived by the skin of my teeth. Dake. Namo Buddhaya. Dake. A clash. A clash, a prayer, common in times of distress. And I risked a quick glance behind me. I saw them. The forest giants. There were about 5 of them, and next to the fallen tree, there were spiles of scarlet berries. Osh, what the actual hell? I sped on until I reached Liam's lake house. The entire time I was driving on that road, I felt strangely disconnected, my consciousness hazy. My awareness began to fully return only when I spotted Liam's lake house in the distance. I drove up and noticed the area the old woman had mentioned, the one with the affluent properties. There were many grand mansions that looked utterly uninhabited. I always wonder why wealthy people enjoy buying houses and simply leaving them empty instead of living in them. The party was already in full swing. I spent over 5 minutes searching for parking because cars were parked all around the lake house, even spilling onto the shore. And then I noticed there was another entrance to the property, right off the main road, that I had completely bypassed. Damn it. I'm about to go inside Liam's lake house now. I'll probably get nagged about being late as usual. Well, what can I do? It's not like I have a private jet like them. I'll write more later. See you. Alara spoke into the phone, addressing her husband's boss, Michael. I'm sorry, Michael, but David won't be able to make it into the office today. He's still feeling quite unwell. It's been 4 days, Michael complained, a clear note of irritation in his voice. Can I speak to him? You could, if he were awake, Alara replied smoothly. He was up most of the night, terribly sick, and only managed to fall asleep this morning. Please have him call me when he wakes up this morning. Please have him call me when he wakes up then. Absolutely, she affirmed. First thing. Once the call ended, Alara gathered her implements and a worn journal from the kitchen counter. With a determined air, she made her way to the secluded outbuilding at the far end of their property, an old, soundproofed workshop they rarely used. David, wake up! Alara's voice, though quiet, held a sharp edge as she entered the dimly lit space. David jolted awake, his eyes wide with terror, immediately straining against the heavy straps securing him to the cot. The effects of the muscle relaxants, I observe, are clearly waning, Alara noted, watching his struggles dispassionately. With practiced precision, she plunged the pre-filled syringe into his quivering thigh. Please, Alara, stop, David rasped, his voice raw with desperation. I swear I've learned my lesson. I'll never betray you again. You offered similar assurances the last 2 times, she reminded him coolly. I really mean it this time, he insisted, his words already beginning to slur. I don't believe you. She selected a gleaming scalpel from her tray. Please, he whimpered, the sound fading into a mumble as the drugs began to take hold. Time to review our next set of vocabulary, Alara murmured, opening her journal to a designated page. There, a fresh list of 100 words, each a precise descriptor of David in her eyes, awaited. This was the ongoing curriculum of his re-education, a physical manifestation of his transgressions that had consumed the last 4 days. Her fingers lightly brushed the already scarred landscape of his legs. 200 words adorned his left, 200 more etched onto his right. Today, she decided, we will move to the arms. David was pliant now, the drugs asserting their full dominance. Alara carefully lifted his left arm, beginning with the side of his thumb. The word adulter slowly emerged from the skin. Once complete, she meticulously sealed the fresh cuts with a liquid bandage before moving to the index finger, where deceitful was meticulously inscribed. She continued, each stroke deliberate, until the final word from the day's roster had been carved. That concludes our session for today, Ilara announced, letting the scalpel clatter onto the metal tray. She then carefully dressed the most recent wounds. "Is there anything particular you'd like for lunch, David?" she inquired, her voice even. When only silence met her question, Ilara leaned closer, checking his wrist. There was no beat. "Well, isn't that inconvenient?" Ilara sighed, a faint frown creasing her brow. She tapped the cover of her journal. "I'd prepared 1,000 words for you, David. I suppose 500 was sufficient to make my point." My new neighbor, Brenda, appeared at my door, a toddler named Leo clinging to her leg. She introduced herself as the resident to my left, clarifying with a knowing wink that the Davises lived on the other side. Before I could fully respond to her cheerful welcome, she was practically inviting herself inside, eager to see what I'd done with the place since Eleanor and Richard moved across the valley. Once inside my new cottage, Brenda's eyes widened with admiration. She lavished compliments on my decorating, hinting that Eleanor had truly let the place fall into disrepair after her son left for the academy. After assuring me she wouldn't stay long, Brenda shifted topics, asking if I'd met anyone else in the hamlet of Oakhaven, and more importantly, what I knew about the town itself. Admitting my knowledge was scant, I watched as her expression turned serious. "Well, dear," she began, "definitely don't go out alone at night. It's usually best to just avoid it altogether when you can." She explained that I might spot them from a distance, advising me to take a different path, as they are pretty nearsighted. Brenda struggled to describe the entities, calling them horrible, like shadows, but different. She settled on holes, like a negative of a cardboard cutout, usually appearing humanoid, but sometimes taking on strange, unsettling shapes. They only emerged at night, she reiterated, and while they usually couldn't enter buildings, it had happened before. Her advice was simple: keep everything locked and marked with protective sigils. Noticing the absence of a dog, she inquired about pets. I mentioned my cat, Whiskers. Brenda brightened, explaining that pets were surprisingly good at sensing the creatures. Whiskers would be an early warning, much like Eleanor's old canary or the Davises' large mastiff. She then proudly declared her own menagerie: Buttons, a tiny terrier, and 2 enormous hound brothers, Samson and Goliath. Her final, most urgent warning came next. If you hear all 3 of them going nuts, especially if your cat is acting strange, go down to your root cellar and stay out of sight of windows. She assured me they wouldn't linger long if they didn't perceive any movement. As a last resort, if ever caught outside after dark with one nearby, she advised holding perfectly still and being absolutely quiet. It was incredibly risky, she admitted, as they could still see me, but they primarily hunted movement. If they weren't close, running was the best option, as there was usually only one, and she'd only ever seen 3 at once on a single occasion. With a final wave and a promise to introduce my husband Tom, Brenda scooped up little Leo and hurried out, wishing me luck. The small sprite lauded the elderly gentleman for his exceptional performance as the festive gift giver. He had been truly outstanding. The old man, pleased, assured the sprite he'd gladly do it again. Arthur, in his role as the celebrated figure, had indeed cherished the experience. The exhilaration of delivering countless presents was immense, especially knowing the final gift was destined for his own grandchild. He gazed at little Clara, slumbering peacefully. Her special present, a bright yellow excavator, mirrored the very machine her grandfather operated for work. Arthur eagerly anticipated her awakening and the unwrapping of her new treasure. A sudden wave of exhaustion swept over him, causing his legs to ache. He leaned heavily against the doorway of the small cottage. The sprite took his hand. "You possess a truly kind spirit. That's precisely why I selected you." After the passing of the previous Father Christmas, finding a successor was challenging. But then I understood. The true spirit of the gift giver isn't about speed or physical might, it's about being a loving patriarch. So, I always choose the most benevolent grandfather in the world, and through the power of affection, he saves the holiday season. Arthur managed a weary smile. It was quite an experience, little one. Perhaps next. A cough racked his frail frame. Next year, you might find another method of recruitment. The sprite's cheerful expression faltered, momentarily revealing a human-like sorrow. Ah, yes. About that. Suddenly, Arthur's legs buckled beneath him. His vision blurred, and the sprite's voice, though full of sadness, seemed to drift from a great distance. To ensure all those gifts reach their destinations on time, the gift giver must expend every ounce of heart and vigor. There's simply none left for survival. But your sacrifice has brought millions a joyous Christmas. The sprite gently removed the cat from Arthur's head. Farewell. I must depart now. I only have a year to locate the next finest grandfather in the world. The sprite turned and walked away. Arthur knew he should pursue him, warn the next unwitting elder of his impending fate. But he could barely lift his head to gaze at his sleeping grandchild. Clara was so serene. The small cottage was dim, the window unadorned. He had forgotten to put up decorations, promising himself next year. He was 62. Clara was still so young. The world's most devoted grandfather buried his heavy head in his trembling arms. He would be nothing more than a fleeting memory to her, perhaps a few cherished tales. Your grandpa just drifted off peacefully, you see. He was watching over you. And now he watches from above. If he had been given a choice, if he had been told that embodying Father Christmas would lead to his demise, he would have condemned the other children. He yearned to witness Clara's growth. Perhaps she would become an excavator operator, or a healer, given her fondness for mending dolls, or a heroine who would vanquish malicious sprites, or. Arthur's eyelids finally succumbed. Outside, the inaugural snowflakes began their descent, and the festive gift giver was no more.